Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inca's webinar. I'll just take a few minutes and introduce myself. My name is Lisa. I am an Inca alum, board certified nurse coach, faculty member at the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy, and co-host for the Integrative Nurse Coach Gathering webinar. This evening, Dr. Karen Avino and Dr. Margaret Erickson will be joining us to discuss all that you need to know for the Nurse Coach certification. It is with my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Avino, the Executive Director of Education for the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy and the International Nurse Coach Association, providing online and on-site continuing education programs for nurses. As a consultant, Dr. Avino helps healthcare organizations create optimal healing environments and integrate holistic nursing into practice. She taught holistic nursing and integrative health for 20 years in online and on-campus university classes. She is board certified as both an advanced holistic nurse and a health and wellness nurse coach. Dr. Avino is a Reiki master, stress management instructor, heart math and clinical meditation and imagery practitioner. Dr. Avino served as director at large, board member of the American Holistic Nurses Association. She is an author and editor of Holistic Nursing, a handbook for practice. Dr. Avino is a peer reviewer for the Journal of Nursing Scholarship and Holistic Nursing Practice Journal. Dr. Avino, thank you for being here for episode 1 of the Integrative Nurse Coach Gathering. I would also like to now introduce my fellow co-host, Carly Mertz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carly Mertz. I am also an Inca alum and board certified nurse coach, Inca's nurse planner and program coordinator, and my newest role as being the co-host of this webinar. It is also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Margaret Erickson. Dr. Margaret Erickson is a certified advanced practice holistic nurse. She received her BSN from the University of Michigan and her MSN and PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Erickson has been the CEO of the American Holistic Nurses Credentialing Corporation for the past 23 years. She's consulted with numerous universities and healthcare institutions to facilitate the implementation of holistic nursing practice and a holistic-based paradigm for healthcare transformation. Dr. Erickson has taught holistic nursing at the graduate and undergraduate levels at both the University of Texas and Tennessee State University. She has researched, published, and presented nationally in holistic nursing, theory-based practice, and holistic health. Dr. Erickson is a founding member of the Global Academy of Holistic Nursing and currently serves as chair of the Integrative Health Policy Consortium. She is the president-elect of the board of directors for the Accreditation Board for Specialty Nursing Certification and is on the executive committee of the Society for Advancement of Modeling and Role Modeling. And if anybody has any questions, please type them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. And welcome Dr. Karen Avino and Dr. Margaret Erickson.
Thank you so much. Dr. Erickson, I know you have a very busy schedule, and we're really excited that you took the time to meet with us this evening because we know that nurse coaches have lots of questions about the certification exam. From your bio, let's just talk a little bit about how, it sounds like you really developed a holistic philosophy of practice very early in your career. So how did you find your path to the American Holistic Nurse Credentialing Center, otherwise known as AHNCC?
Well, Karen, I was raised by a holistic nursing theorist, so I never knew that there was a way of being that was other than holistic. And it wasn't until I got my master's degree, really started graduate school that I learned to be able to label what I was doing, because I think language is incredibly important. And when we're able to use theory-based practice, whether you're whatever setting you are, regardless of how you're showing up as a nurse, it allows you to explain, predict, communicate, and be very intentional. And so I grew up thinking about people as being greater than some of the parts and indivisible, and practice from that framework. But it wasn't until I had my higher level of education, and I came back from my master's after 20 years in the field. So, I worked at Ellsworth Air Force Base, which was a very diverse population. I got to work in the Black Hills in South Dakota, so I worked with a lot of Native Americans off the Pine Ridge Reservation. I did some independent practice in rural South Dakota. I worked mental health, ICU, and what I learned is we're more alike than different. And then I went back, and I remember being my first week in the master's program, and I said, I can't do this. What did I think I was doing? I am not qualified for this. And by the end of the week, I learned how important the experience was. And I became, I was offered the position with HNCC when I left the University of Texas at Austin. And I thought, well, I don't really know about this, but I'll give it a shot. And because I was so passionate about holistic nursing, we've gone from 1 to 5 exams, and it's been the village that's done it. I'm not owning that. But I think that certification is really important because it validates to the world that we've met certain standards. So initially, I didn't plan to I wanted to go back to teaching. But in all honesty, it gave me more life-work balance initially because I had kids in school, and I wanted to be able to be a room mom sometimes and do field trips. And then it just kind of took off. So
it blossomed.
Oh my goodness. Acres and acres of blossom.
That's right. Yeah, it is quite interesting when we talk with each other in nursing about the paths that we've taken and all the experiences that we've had along the way, and how that really has influenced our philosophy about practice and our philosophy about the things that we know that we can work with others in different dimensions other than just tasks, right? That we're taught kind of in the schools of nursing.
They come secondary.
It does. It absolutely does. Many of the nurses on this call, we know, have an interest in the nurse coach certification exam. Either they're getting ready for it or they have to recertify. So we know that there has to be an in-depth process really to creating a specialty board examination. Can you tell us more about that process?
Well, I sure can. And I appreciate having the opportunity to talk about it because people don't understand the whole process. I certainly didn't until I had the opportunities, multiple opportunities to be involved in it, in-depth involvement. One of the things that's required for any national certification examination is an ongoing review of the literature. And one of the challenges we've all had in nurse coaching is that we don't have as much research out there as we want. And it's coming. It will come because nurse coaches are already very important, but are going to be even more important in the future of healthcare. And so we have a committee called the Practice Analysis / Role Delineation Study Committee. And their job is to review all the literature they can find. And since we're talking about nurse coaching specifically, about nurse coaching, we have different committee members assigned to that. So it is always being researched. It's always being looked at. And because we have a Journal of Holistic Nursing, but we don't have yet a Journal of Nurse Coaching per se. When that comes, it'll make it much easier because it's a matter of trying to review wherever it shows up. American Nurse, Advances in Nursing Science, the Journal of Holistic Nursing. But we have somebody or a couple people that review the nurse coach literature, and it's continuous. And then every 5 years, we have to do something called a practice analysis survey. Now, the difference between a practice analysis and a role delineation study is that a practice analysis looks at the practice of a specialty the role of coaching, whichever arena is being reviewed in depth. The role delineation study looks at if there's a basic and advanced. So we do a practice analysis for a nurse coach. In the future, I expect we'll be doing a role delineation study, which is looking at both the practice competencies and the different levels of practice, like a basic and advanced. But the role delineation study or the practice analysis, depending on what we're studying, is a validation of what the literature has found. So what happens is we have way back when in 2013, when the first practice analysis survey was done, and it was based on the art and science of nurse coaching, which was written by the national leaders. They called themselves the Professional Nurse Coach Work Group. And they were the ones that wrote the first edition of the art and science, the competencies and scope of practice for nurse coaching. That was based on an extensive literature review. So initially, the competencies came from that review, from that group of national leaders. Then we had to pick up continued literature review, okay? That's our responsibility as an accredited certifying body, that people have to review the literature, everything we can find on nurse coaching. And based on that, then what happens is those competencies from the past are tweaked. And when I say tweaked, it's like, let me give you an example in holistic nursing. Let's see, 10 years ago, in 2013, we started seeing expressive arts being implemented in healthcare systems to help with reminiscence therapy, with helping with end of life, helping with trauma resolution. And it wasn't very common. It was out there in a few places. So the practice analysis group said, let's throw this in and let's see what happens, because it's showing up in the literature. And the literature is the place we look because it is expected that the experts are the ones that are publishing. So for holistic nursing, we put the expressive arts out, and some nurses said, yeah, it's important. But what happened in the next 5 years is the literature showed more and more and more of that competency. So we start off with the initial competencies written by the Professional Nurse Coach Work Group. Then we continue to review the literature. You're always reviewing the literature for the examination you're preparing for. Those competencies went through 3 or 4 different sets of experts, people who are known as experts in nurse coaching, and they'd say, oh, that really doesn't belong under the nurse coaching process, or that really belongs under self-reflection, or that really isn't communications as much as it's research. They not only looked at the core values, but they looked at whether or not things needed to be added. And one of the things that we saw popping up in the latest practice analysis, both nurse coaching and holistic nursing, is more of an awareness to be focused on the diverse population, the underserved populations. Underserved, and because they're underserved, the marginalized population. Meaning that, for example, in holistic nursing, we had the ableism versus the disabled, the homeless vets, the racial groups that were being ignored, et cetera. And we had already had some competencies that addressed those, but it was broader, because you cannot have a competency that says, as a nurse coach, the nurse coach will assess the cultural and environmental background of the Hispanic group, of the Black group, of the disabled group or the abled group, the homeless vets. So what happened with this last review is that there was tweaking done. And after the last group of panelists took a look at it and they said, it's set to go, then that goes out and is formatted into a survey, which we call the practice analysis survey. And we send it out to all our practicing nurse coaches and health and wellness coaches. And what we're doing is asking, A, is it something you do as a nurse coach? And how important is it? We had 331 nurses respond, and the majority of them, over 60% of those respondents, had over 20 years in nursing. So they were not what I would consider baby or brand new. What we are seeing from an interest perspective now is younger nurses are getting more interested in nurse coaching because we're burning them out at the bedside. And we're not able to do what I say is the essence of nursing. We had 331. They came from all different groups. The 20 to 30 group was the very youngest. And then we had the highest group, 51 to 61 plus, had over 200 participants that responded. Now, people say they're a pain. They are a pain to do. But the reason that the practice analysis survey is so critically important is as practitioners, you're validating these are the competencies we do. This is what's important to our practice. This is who we are serving, and this is how we prioritize them. Most of the majority respondents were from the South and Southwest. And then we had them from Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, and New England had the least number of respondents. After the survey is done, and it took us about 2 months. As you know, getting people to do research is kind of a drag. Nobody really understands why it has to be done or why it's important, but it really is validating what your certification means. It validates that your role as a nurse coach, the special knowledge, skills, and activities you have are validated through this process. So the analysis is done of the respondents, the nurse coach, the practicing nurse coaches. Based on that analysis, the exam blueprint is broken down. So the exam blueprint is actually like 22% deals with communication and research, 50% deals with nurse coaching, the nurse coaching process. It actually comes from what our respondents tell us. What is important and how important is it? Because one of the things that we ask is to prioritize. And most of the respondents prioritize the majority of the competencies at over a 3, which means that the recognition of all those competencies are important to practice. Now, very often what you'll see in some of the specialties is they'll say, oh, it's not politically correct anymore to say, oh, it's not important to have EDI addressed. But when you look at some of them, whether it's critical care or some of those other ones, there's not the priority on communication, connection, relationship. They'll give a lower priority often than being able to read your lab values or to get an IV in or to have that PICC line work and understand it. So the examination blueprint is completed. It shows very little difference than the last one. The competencies were found to be very stable. There were some changes. Now, one of the questions everybody has is, which reference should I be using? Okay. Now, the art and science of coaching is very in-depth, covers a lot of information. Okay. And it's been done by the experts. I will just say it's been done by the experts, but it has more details than the competencies. What it does is it enriches your studying, it enriches your knowledge base. But when you want to know what are the test items actually written to, we will never tell you, go to page number 3 in AHNA scope and standards. It is the competencies that you see that have gone through a very rigorous practice analysis. And in order to have those competencies recognized and for us to meet the standards, so we have national accreditation and ANCC Magnet recognized, that process of the literature review, having the panels of experts review them and say, are they, and we are one of the few groups, this is interesting because several of the groups, national groups that I work with, when I first started working with them, had no core values. Now, core values is really a biggie these days. And so I'm like, okay, what guides are, well, we just do it this way. Well, now all the boards that I'm at, they all have core values. But when you look at specialties, we're unique in that many don't have the core values. So we divide our competencies up by core values and then by the standards. Or I want to say scope. I can't use the word standards because we haven't done everything yet to meet those requirements. But the accreditation process, being ANCC Magnet recognized, which requires the national accreditation, require that we go through this process. The lit review, the expert panels, and I didn't mention that when we go from expert panels to RDS survey setup, somebody has to go through and review everything again. We checked on the demographics. Then we get the practitioners to validate that they do these competencies and they prioritize them. The exam development, the exam blueprint is created. And then the last step is something called it's either called subject matter expert panel, or it's called the Angoff cut score panel. And what we are required to do is show representation of our certificates at that meeting. And in that meeting, we had 8 subject matter experts from New York, Texas, Georgia, Idaho, West Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, everywhere from perioperative with a focus on people who have cancer to ER recovery, health and wellness coach who also did L&D, pediatric cardiology, ICU, CCU, neurosurgery. So our coaches, they all had to be certified as nurse coaches, came from a wide geographical location and a very diverse setting background. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the other thing is that you have to have babies, people who just started that may have been only certified a year, all up to those who've been certified longer. And the intent with the score setting panel is that whenever you set a score, it's minimally qualified. And this is something we have to say all the time. And it's critically important that we don't have too many experts, too many highly qualified people on the panel, because if you practice and you meet the requirements, minimally qualified, you should be successful if you're prepared for the exam. So it is not expected when people come into the score setting committee that they have 20 years under their belts and that they're all faculty in the educational program. And so these people sat down, they had a little orientation from CNET. I introduced myself. We give continuing competency credit, not only for the RDS, because you learn a lot when you do it, even though it's a pain, but you also get credit when you sit on one of these score setting committees. And they go through every single question. And then the question that is asked is somebody who is minimally qualified expected to answer this question? And based on the percentages, like if you have 90% that say absolutely, you can still have somebody who's brand new that says, wait a minute, I'm brand new. I went through a great program and I never heard of this. Let's talk about it. Is this really something that every minimally qualified person should know? And based on the percentages that everybody put in, they come up with a percentage passing score. And so that's how the score is set on the exam. Now, I want to say, Karen, the passing score is like 70 or 71, something like that. The new exam will have 140 questions, but 20 of those will be experimental. And that's standard that you have experimental so that they can see if it's a good question. A good question should have 2 close answers. And the people who are considered high scores should be getting those, whereas people who are more at the bottom of that passing scale often will have problems with those. It is never desirable, it is for those of us taking the exam, but it's never expected to be a good item if everybody gets it right. So the new competencies that will be being tested will be coming out in the next month or 2. They will be on our website. Anybody taking the exam right now is fine with the competencies. The Art and Science of Nurse Coaching is the best reference. It is, we call it the secondary reference. And when you write the scope and competencies as experts, you are coming, I want to say, from an expert perspective. Again, that often tiers the levels in an exam. In other words, if you have somebody who's been doing coaching for 20 years, what they would expect of a competency is not what you're going to probably expect of somebody who has just started your program, right? So the first is the competencies, because the items, and we welcome item writers, and you are given continuing competency credit for that because you learn a lot. But we write to those, and I say we, I'm talking collectively, write to those competencies that are on our website. The Art and Science of Nurse Coaching is your next reference, and it's going to take you deeper into those competencies. And then the practice exam is the third level of primary reference. There are many good secondaries. There's an excellent one that you guys use in the INCA program, because what you want is sometimes to get the information in different ways so that it sticks. We can hear something 3 times and it's the third time that we finally get it. So there are different references that you can access and use for that. Did I explain that well enough, Karen, or are there any questions about that?
It's a lot of information.
It is.
And but it is an involved process. And certainly we know that those competencies and the scope is really what helps to guide our practice. So that
That's
has
right.
to be a critical part of what we're learning, we're demonstrating, and also then being tested on. So that's great. You mentioned the art and science of nurse coaching, and I'm sure you're referring to the second edition of that now. And within 1 to 2 months, we will have the new exam out that will reflect the new not new competencies, I shouldn't say that, but the revised blueprint, I would say.
Yeah, and you're going to find, Karen, one of the things that's really interesting, because this is grounded in a holistic philosophy, and because maybe nurse coaching is relatively new, there is the major difference in the blueprint is, say before it was 41% for nurse coaching process. Now it's 40 to 42. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the specialties are doing is giving a little leeway, because sometimes something comes up and there's a great question, they want to include it, and so there's a little leeway. But otherwise, it's 1% or no percent difference in the blueprint. What the competencies are, nurse coaching is getting more advanced in the sense that we're seeing the basic, and we're seeing the people who have been out there like yourself, Linda, Barbie, who have been around a long time and have a lot of expertise. I see there's a question in. All right, the pass rate first time of this exam is very high. I want to say it's 94 or 95%. We have gotten grief about that because a lot of the specialties have a pass rate more of like 60 to 70%. And I say our people come in qualified. The bottom line is, it's not that it's an easy exam. And I want to say right up front that, and I've heard this, and Karen and I have talked about this, the practice exam, I think, is harder than the national exam. And people repeatedly say that. But what the practice exam gives you is an idea of how the questions are written. They're all short answer. They're all short, one answer. Multiple choice, one answer. There's no short answer. There's no essay. There's no multiple guess. And so we have a very high pass rate on the nurse coaches who come in, and we've been given grief about it because they think we have too many people pass. Repeat the references. Our competencies is number 1, and that's on our website. And you just go on and download it off resources and supporting documents.
That's the essentials of core competencies
document.
That is the
essentials core document, core competency document. It's Appendix A. And you don't even have to worry about all the other stuff, because I'm going to tell you it'll fill your head. Go right to the appendix and it'll tell you about the competencies that are used to write the items. That's number 1. Number 2 is the Art and Science of Nurse Coaching Edition 2. And there's a lot of overlap. What you get in that is more detail. And as Karen talked about, the scope of our practice is incredibly important, because it tells us the what, when, where, how, and why we do what we do. And so it kind of gives you the big framework, and then everything else fits within that framework. And so that's going to give you, like, if you see something on page such and such, and it's 1.1.A, you don't need to worry about that if it's not in the competencies. And what I suggest is people go use your recycled paper, go download the competencies, take a highlighter, and look through it and say, oh yeah, this makes sense, this makes sense. I want to highlight this and check it out. So number 2 is the second edition, and then number 3 is the practice exam. Dawn, and you can find that in the information is also in the handbook.
Mm-hmm.
How soon do students take the exam after graduation? Some take it immediately, and some want to study some more. It depends on what you're comfortable with. What I will tell you is your CEs or contact hours, I guess I'm supposed to call them, are good for 3 years. So you want your application in before it expires. And people say, why does it expire? Because with any specialty, in any nationally accredited specialty certification examination, the idea is that your knowledge is current. So if you took this 10 years ago, that's not considered current. Does that make sense?
Sure, it definitely does. It also kind of leads us into a question about AHNCC has an interesting approach to certification with a dual certification designation. And how did that come about?
Well, the bottom line is, and Paula, I'll get back to you with your question in a minute. Or Karen, if you'll remind me. The story behind nurse coaching is Linda Bark came to us and said they are developing a new profession. Now, I practice from MRM theory base. I've always believed that the primary source of data is the client, that it's their needs, not ours, that we need to address, that our job is to create a contractual relationship with the individual and listen. And so I was like, no, this is not a new profession. Actually, facilitating health and wellness through the lifespan, even as we take our last breath, is nursing. And so we went to ANA and we said, we need to hold the space for nursing. Nursing is already doing this, but they don't necessarily have the skills and expertise. Nurse coaching focuses on those skills and expertise to meet this need. And ANA said, we've got other things we're not interested in. So we did a needs assessment, and over 900 nurses responded and said it was important. At that time, we were offering the holistic nursing exam. And holistic nursing really focuses on health and wellness and well-being through the lifespan. It has a few questions as you get to the advanced level on healing interventions, but we don't test healing therapies or modalities. If you want to learn about Healing Touch, we send you to the national organization because the test has no validity if you chose to, say, ask 3 questions of 40 different modalities. That means nothing. And so we recognized that we already had an exam that looked at health and wellness. But what we wanted was an exam grounded in holism, because I don't believe you can be a good nurse coach. We didn't believe it. Our needs assessment said it's a philosophy of holism is really important, that we see the people as greater than sum of the parts, that we're in relationships, it's patient-centric, et cetera. So what we looked at for the nurse coach and the literature and what the professional nurse coach work group came up with was that expertise, knowledge, and skills that focuses on communications, that it focuses on those coaching skills that would be wonderful if all nurses had them, but we know they don't. And so then what we looked at is we said, okay, if they have both, then they not only are certified as a holistic nurse, but they have that health and wellness component because their expertise is in holistic nursing and nurse coaching. And that's how it came about. Now,
Great.
What's interesting is way back when Barbie and I and several of the other people were at that initial summit in Boston and they were talking about coaching in this new profession, we said, wait a minute. We've been in holistic nursing. You're talking about tenets of holistic nursing. We've been around for 40 plus years. And there was a doctor, I want to say his name was Livingston out of Harvard. And he stood up and he said, well, my nurses don't know anything about this. And I said, that's because your nurses are not holistic and have not been educated in a philosophical framework of holism. So at that time, they were talking about components, but the way they identified health and wellness was, you got your aerobics 3 times a week. You got your 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Your A1C was good. Your BMI was good. And I finally got frustrated because there are hundreds there. And it was often, many of them were medical physicians or medical doctors, but there were also biologists, plumbers, kinesiologists, etc. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. When we talk health and wellness and nursing, we talk about holistic with an H. And I said, so everybody is thin, everybody runs, everybody sleeps, and they're all suicidal. Is that healthy? Well, it kind of dumbfounded them. And the other thing that we heard, and I know Barbie and I have talked about it since then, is there's like, oh, well, somebody has diabetes. We're going to refer them. Well, somebody has spiritual angst. Oh, we'll refer them. Oh, somebody has a wound that's not healing. Oh, we'll refer them. And I said, yeah, you can refer them to the nurse coaches, because we are not claiming that we are experts in every area, but we are the profession that has the broadest base and the most holistic perspective, that we look at cognitive, social, psychosocial, emotional, physical, etc. So that's the history behind not only how we got into nurse coaching, but how we identified the health and wellness component and the nurse coaching expertise, skills, knowledge, and values.
So if you're board certified, you take two different exams, one as a holistic nurse and one as a nurse coach, and then your designation changes to health and wellness nurse coach board certified. And it's an interesting path, because a lot of us were first board certified as a holistic nurse. So it just was a very normal process to continue on to develop that framework for the delivery of care. So can you tell us why you think that nurses should get certified as a nurse coach?
Before I do that, I'm looking at my time. Can I answer a couple of these questions?
Yeah, I thought maybe we could do that
At the end?
when we got done with the questions. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine, Karen. Just make sure I don't forget, because I know
Okay.
there's always people that are stressed. Can you repeat that question for me?
Why should nurses, get certified as a nurse coach?
Okay, people get certified for a lot of reasons. What I will say is that certification is a way of validating your knowledge, your skills, your expertise. It is a way of validating it to your colleagues, so you're seen as an expert. It's a way of validating it to the consumers. My son, many years ago, he's 26 now, and when he was about 21, he said, you're talking to the wrong group of people. You need to be talking to the consumers, because those are the ones who are going to value you. Those are the ones that are going to seek out your help. And I think that one of the things HNCC has been doing now is we've been doing a lot more social media and having a lot more social media presence, both about the nurse coaching and the holistic nursing. But that certification exam means that you've met some very high standards. Now, we all know that there are some exams out there you can take that are more of a certificate. And people say, what's the difference between a certificate program and a certification program? A certification program is a nationally recognized program where you have to meet certain standards. And if the certification is accredited, all of our exams are, and they are all ANCC magnet recognized, it means that you've gone through a very rigorous process. We go for accreditation every 5 years. The last application we put in was over 1,300 pages long. And it requires that you go through 18 different standards and you show proof and evidence that you meet all those standards. And what that means then is that credential means something. Now I'm not saying certificates don't mean something, but a certificate of completion can be very extensive. It can involve an exam, but it usually does not have the same rigor. It is not recognized as having met those same standards. So you are validating to yourself. A lot of people do it for personal reasons. It is important to have those credentials if you want to go into independent practice. It is recognized in a lot of universities or organizations when you have national certification, not just at working, for example, we have nurse coaches that work at the bedside part-time and then they have independent practice. It is important to magnet hospitals that the credentials are nationally accredited and recognized. So they want people who are doing I would say, the ones who are keeping the hospitals open to have certification, but they also want their leaders, because that means that you've reached, you've done the extra work and the extra effort. It also means that consumers are more likely to trust that you know what you're doing. I had somebody who got certified in, he's a hospice palliative care nurse. So his certification is in holistic nursing, and he's going on for his nurse coaching. And what he said is, I thought about it and I initially did it for me, but he said, I can't tell you the difference it makes when I say to a family, they say, well, tell me about yourself. And he says, I have national certification. And the relief and the trust that comes with it, he said, has been very profound. So it's validating to your colleagues, your employers. Often it's associated with a higher pay grade or clinical ladder. There are universities that want their faculty, whether it's to be as an executive or if your area is palliative care, but it's a way of having it recognized that you're kind of the cream of the crop. You've gone the extra mile. You have the knowledge and skills that makes you unique.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's very true. And it's really helps us with, I think, personal growth, right? Not just professional growth, but personal growth within ourselves. So it's almost like a lifelong learning process, that we go through. We know nurse coaching offers us like increased opportunities, really, also to emphasize self-care for ourselves, improve our own personal life satisfaction, even through this self-development process, and refreshes nursing practice because we know that nursing certainly needs that now. And it places this core emphasis, I guess, on really, the center of what nursing practice is, which is health promotion and caring. And we can't forget about that. And it really provides us with the opportunity to be able to express that in ways and teaches us new methods of communication with our clients that allows us to do that in a way that's very meaningful. So it's, we see nurse coaching as really taking an active leadership role in taking charge of our own nursing practice. And, because we're in, unfortunately, a changing, segregated healthcare system, but nurses can take charge and nurses can take this role and create something not only for themselves, but to improve overall healthcare by, really emphasizing lifestyle health and wellness. So it's an opportunistic really time to take this, make this significant changes and redesign the role of nursing practice to what it should be, as we know it should be. I know there are a few questions here, and maybe, Margaret, I can read those to you. Okay. Paula had asked about what was said about relevance on the website for certification knowledge to learn for testing questions, the Holistic Nursing Association website or a different one? I think,
let me just answer that because that's probably the number one question. What I tell everybody is go to our website, ahncc.org. Go along the navigator bar to resources. Scroll down to supporting documents. And there you'll find the Nurse Coach Core Essentials document. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you click on it, go to the appendix. And that's where the practice competencies are. And that's what the items are written to. So again, get your recycled paper out, print those competencies off. This, I think, is the easiest way to do it because you can actually have something that documents what you might want to follow up on and highlight something if you think, I'm not sure about that. I want to follow up on that. I want to learn more. I'm going to give an obvious that you guys all know, motivational interviewing. So I'm going to highlight that and go back. And then that is the very first reference because that's what those items are written to. For example, in holistic nursing, one of the, if not the first, I think it's the first practice competency, it's something about setting intention to be present before you do anything else. The question might be as straightforward as before you do anything else, you set intention, you read the history, you visit with the outgoing shift. It can be that direct. And then, of course, there are going to be questions that test it, but are not that direct. One of the questions is, are there case scenarios? And then you go through and read a whole bunch. No, each question stands alone. And so the goal is not to test your reading ability. The goal is to test whether or not you feel comfortable and you're knowledgeable about those competencies. So the questions all stand alone. They're all single answer. There's no ABD or BCE. There's 4 choices, and you're going to see right away that a couple of them are wrong. I'm going to say that coming from Inca. Inca has an excellent, very, very good pass rate. And then there are going to be a couple where you have to think about it. And it might be that you're prioritizing which is more important, or it might be, and it's not NCLEX type exams. You're not going to find drugs of choice. You're not going to find policy and procedures. They're more conceptual, or in this, Mr. Jones, blank, 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 what would be the next thing a nurse coach would do? Or in this situation, what is going on with Mr. Jones, and talk about the different stages. So the intent is to be very direct. The intent is not to surprise or fool or trick you. We do not do, the items are, I don't know that there are any on this because they're not standard operating procedures. We never use double negative questions where you have to read them 3 times. You should be able to read them right away and get it.
Great,
Okay.
thank you. So Megan was asking if the core essentials are different or the same.
They're the core competencies, Megan, you're going to find are very similar. One of the things that's going on right now in the literature is, as I said, we're starting to see more awareness of EDISJB, all the equity, diversity, social justice awareness, understanding about people's cultural differences, because how can you, now as the nurse coach, if you listen and you step into their lived experience, you're going to get it. But there's a little more on that out there, but you're not going to find things that are radically different. And if you're wanting to know when to sit for the exam, the next couple of months, and I will notify as soon as the core competencies are up there, and I have the very final copy, those will go up, and I'll notify Karen and the other educational groups. And thereafter, then I can tell you when the new exam will be. But my guess is, because the competencies in the blueprint have really changed very little, I think what you'd have to do is you'd have to hold the competencies next to each other and go with a fine-tooth comb to find those differences, that you're okay if you take this one or the next one. But I will let you know as soon as they're out there.
We always recommend taking the exam as soon as you finish the program. The information is fresh in your head. You don't want to wait and take something that perhaps has changed. But based on that practice analysis, my interpretation was it's essentially the same. So I don't think you should worry too much about that. Here's a theory question, and you're the perfect person for this. How important is it to know which philosophy goes with which originator of a particular theory? There's so many middle range to grand theories, Michael is asking.
That's a great question. What I will say, I'm putting this out first for holistic nursing, is that we have 7 that we really identify. Rogers, Erickson, Parsi, Margaret Newman, Dossie, Nightingale, Weiniger. Those are the main ones that we recognize for holistic nursing. Now, there are some other ones. Prosecco, is that
sounds like Prosecco, which is
you know who I'm talking about. You guys probably know, but there are not. The question is not, because we have people go through and look at the items, and they look at them. That's the other, I left out something. After the blueprint, items are written to that blueprint and those competencies, and they go through not just writing, but a review session. And so somebody might say such and such, let's call it Douglas and Smith's stage of change. And somebody will look at it and say, well, yeah, I learned that. And the other 7 people in the review group are going to say, I never heard of it. So those are not going to be tested. The questions are not supposed to find the little tiny details. Like when I did my doctoral work, there was actually a question that in so-and-so's book, and we had 42 books to prepare from. On page 42 of chapter such and such, in the 3rd paragraph, we don't do that. That's not, the idea is not to trick you. So from a theoretical perspective, I'm going to say that when you see theory questions on the exam, especially the nurse coach, it's going to be ones that I don't think you will have missed. I think you will have learned them. It's not, in 1913 when nurse coaching or coaching first started, or this is not a history test and this is not something to trick you. So, and I am always an email away. So if you have questions when you get in the process, Karen and your faculty are wonderful references and resources, but you can always contact us as well. If there's a theory thing in there, it might say the basic theory, such and such and such, but you're not going to be expected to be theory experts for this exam.
So know the name and know the basic concept that goes along with that theorist. That's the best way to really study for that. So Deidre is asking about the exams broken down into named subject sections like the practice exams in the nurse coach resource document for the nurse coach exam. So she wants to know, is the exam broken down into sections and named?
No, it is not. It is, and they mix them up because when you have a national exam, the intent is not to get you in the role of, oh, now we're thinking communication, and now the intent is to have the questions stand alone. So you're not going to have one that says communications, research. It's going to be multiple choice, single answer throughout the whole thing. And as I said, there are 20 of them that are experimental, and you will find out immediately that you've passed. I'm just setting intent. You're going to find out immediately that you've passed. You don't have to go home and worry about it.
Excellent. And I think we've answered the other ones. The passing scores about a 70 or 71%. Of the total number that's giving. They're asking how many questions are on the test, which she did mention there were 120 questions.
120 scored. There are 20 additional experimental. So there's 140, and I believe that you have 3 hours to sit for the exam. And one of the things I want to say, and I've had it highlighted in the book, is once you apply, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes sooner, but about 4 to 6 weeks to hear back. Then you have a specific number of business days, and I want to say it's 10 or 14 business days to respond. You want to respond so that you can set up your appointment. You have 3 months to test, and you pick the date and the location that works for you. They are all computerized. There's no paper, pencil exams offered unless you need special accommodations, and then you can talk to CNET about that.
And I do have to say that they have found locations for testing around the world. So we've had students, in other countries, and it's been successful that way. So I think we're out of time, Dr. Erickson, and I just want to really thank you so much for taking your time, answering our questions. I think we have a good understanding that really it appears as though the competencies are so similar. It's not something to be concerned about, that there's great changes in the new exam, that they'll remain the same. The core values will remain the same, but the important piece is to always go to the ahncc.org website and look for the core competency document and study that along with the second edition of the Art and Science of Nurse Coaching. So thank you very, very much. I think we have our moderators who might come on for a moment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Erickson and Dr. Avino. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you were able to get some necessary questions asked, and the recording will go out, so you'll also be able to review it. And as always, you can email Inka. Before we go, Carly, if you just wanted to.
I just wanted to tell everybody about our free open house that's going to be every third Tuesday of every month at 7:30 Eastern Time. It's going to be with one of our clinical faculty members, Lindsay Frey, and she's going to be there to answer any of your questions that you have about our programs. And the first one will be on February 21st. So a lot of people might find that helpful. And also, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that's for alumni and prospective students or anyone who would like to ask questions.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Carly,
And then,
before you
uh-huh.
cut us off, I want to give my email address too. So go ahead and finish, and then I'll put it in
Oh,
chat
yeah.
and everybody can see it.
Okay, that sounds great.
They just have to click on chat on the bottom of the screen and they'll see it.
Yes. And then everyone can also follow the Integrative Nurse Coach Academy on social media. We have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And you can find out dates and our exciting new topics and speakers that we will have on the Integrative Nurse Coach Gathering. So thank you so much, Dr. Avino and Dr. Erickson.
Carly,
thank you.
I thank you. I asked, it looks like only the hosts and panelists can see it. So I'm going to give my email address, which is, it is ahnc@flash.net. And I'm an email away if you need me. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you so much.